what I'll do, what I will do is that I will just start very briefly and hand over to Eric. So I'll just give my perspective on glaciers then, and I'm I'm not working entirely only with glaciers, and I'm not a glaciologist as Eric is. Um, I am I'm a visual practitioner basically, and you could say a practice-based photo historian. That's how I started. So, but I work with landscape. I work with nature and our relationships with nature and how we perceive and represent nature and how we do this through visual practice. So it's a kind of mix of art and humanities that I usually work with. But I also work a lot cross-disciplinary. So I've been working for many years with other disciplines, and among them glaciologists. And I'm really happy that I've met Eric, worked with him, and the kind of knowledge and practice that Eric can bring into this. I also know Eric's father, and I've worked with him quite a lot for many years, who is a glaciologist as well in Stockholm University. So I have learned a great many things about glaciers. But of course, if you really want to know what a glacier is and how it really works, I will leave that happily to Eric to explain to you. But we share an interest in the way we can today also use contemporary uh, visual technology to actually try to say something about the situation of glaciers in the world and how it's changing and so forth. So I I wanted to start actually with a poem and no, going back here, something happened there. Um, and this was written in 1817. So I'm thinking about also what was shown in many of your really nice drawings. Um, it was about mountains, for instance, and this was actually written in the Alps. So this is by Percy Shelley, 1817. And as you can see, I can read it. The glaciers creep like snakes that watch their prey from their far fountains. Slow rolling on, there are many a precipice. Frost and the sun is scorn of mortal power, have piled dome, pyramid, and pinnacle, a city of death, distinct with many a tower and wall impregnable of beaming ice. And this is, of course, a very romantic way of looking at glaciers. And of course, Percy Shelley was a romantic poet in that time and very much influenced by somebody called Coleridge, who wrote a poem called The Ancient Mariner, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So this was an era of the 19th century where a lot of also maybe the way we kind of view nature was formed in many ways. So you have this kind of poetic part of that, but you also, on the other hand, had people like Alexander von Humboldt, who gave us a very different view of the world, um, who expressed his ways of exploring and his ways of being out there, trying to communicate that type of experience. And this is a core thing in the work that we do that is about trying to also understand nature in a way, but also do that through conceptions of how do we experience it and how do we relate to it and how do we live with it. So this is something that I find challenging, and this is also something that I found very interesting, trying to actually also communicate places that are very far off. And as Gabriella said in the beginning, uh, maybe, I mean, some of you are obviously familiar with the Alps, meaning that you probably have seen glaciers. But of course, there's a lot of people, and normally when I lecture, there's I would say that most of the people in the lecture room has never really seen a glacier in real life. But there is a lot of focus right now on glaciers. You almost see that every day in the news, that glaciers are melting. And often you think about maybe Antarctica, for instance, where the really big ice shelves are, or Greenland. And those two places are, of course, really important in the long term of rising sea level. But we've seen in late reports now that the glaciers that we're working with here, for instance, like this is in Svalbard that you see here, are also affecting sea level. But they also have another important part to play. And then I'm thinking maybe more on the third pole that we sometimes refer the Himalayas as being, where you have water reservoirs. And again, that type of system of water, Eric is even better than I am to explain. But I can understand that, and I think we all can, that having that reservoir of water is extremely important to a very vulnerable part of Asia. And that can, in the future, create a situation that will affect the entire world. So we're on a global scale facing something that we need to really take into consideration. And one thing with glaciers is scale. We talked about this earlier, Eric and I, and Eric will return to that. This image here, you can see our dwarfed little ship. Eric was part of this trip as well, so he knows the ship that is there by the glacier. But this gives you a little bit of the scale of the type of ice we're talking about that are melting quite fast, actually. Just a couple of notes on this, on that this is not only happening maybe far off places like Antarctica or very sort of glacial lands like Greenland. It happens across the northern hemisphere, but also, of course, in the south and in many places in the world. And I wanted to bring up this one, and this is Andres Magnusson's letter to the future. And this was put down at a site where the first glacier in Iceland to be declared dead was positioned. It was monitored by NASA. So NASA was actually monitoring this through their satellites, and they could eventually declare this glacier dead. And they went up there in Iceland with a group, and they had this kind of ceremony, because of course glaciers in Iceland is so much part of their identity. It's part of the identity of being Icelandic to have the glaciers. And Magnusson then was there. He's a very famous writer and activist and filmmaker and politician in Iceland. So this was put down also as a reminder of where we are, who we are, and how we relate to these things and to the future. And as you can also see, it is really about the future. It's about future generations. And also saying that yes, we did know what was going on, but did we do enough or anything to actually try to change this? Just wanted to give you another example. This is from Canada. So there's a kind of place between the border of Alberta and British Columbia that has a cluster of national parks, and they are all connected to the Rocky Mountains. And there's something called the Icefields Parkway, Alberta, or Icefields Parkway. It runs in Alberta, but it runs from Jasper and down to Banff, and you can then go into Yoho National Park. This is a very, very famous road. National Geographic has coined this road to be one of the most beautiful roads in the world. And it's all based on the idea of viewing glaciers. So that's how it was originally built. And then in Yoho National Park, there is a famous trail called the Iceline Trail, which was there. It was a place where you could walk up the mountain and you can actually walk alongside a set of glaciers hanging on the mountain. We went there, a friend of mine, and one of my associates that I work a lot with in 2017, because we wanted to see this place. And when we came to one of the most famous glaciers, Athabasca Glacier in the Columbia ice fields, which is also Columbia ice fields is also something that is a big glacial land part of this part of the Rocky Mountains in Canada. This is what we came to. It starts already very early on in the walk up towards the glacier, where you can see these signs telling you that in 1982 this would have been where you met the glacier, and you kind of follow this trail, and you can see the landscape is really like walking on the moon, basically, because it is still the landscape where the glacier has retreated, and this is what you come up to. And if you go back, I don't have any photographs right now, but if you go back and look at old photographs, this glacier was actually one of the main features when you were going down this road, the Icefield Parkway. We also wanted to go to Yoho and walk the Iceline Trail. It is a very remote trail. You walk up in the mountains and you can then follow it very high up. So we were really excited doing this. It was, of course, a beautiful summer day, and we thought this is perfect. But when you get up there, this is what you get. So you get basically the remains of what was once the this trail. And I think this is something that, and there was a lot of actually in the news and a lot of talk about this when we came to these places. And I just wanted to briefly mention a couple of things with glaciers, and that is our relationship, because what we are talking about, and what I'm sort of most familiar with, of course, and talk about right now, is the Western view of glaciers. And it's our culture, Western culture, that has put us in the situation that we are currently in. There are other ways of viewing the world. And I've started to work in Canada with native communities. So it's the indigenous, the First Nation called the Haida. And there's a lot of stories about glaciers. And this book, Yuli Cruikshank's book, Do Glaciers Listen, is really, really interesting, because it's very much about another perspective on this and another way of relating to nature and to glaciers. And it gives you other tools to actually see this and think about it. So this is something that I try to slowly incorporate into my thinking about this. Also, Haida, as I said, it's an island community on the north part of British Columbia, out on the west coast, and they have a story about Kalgajad, which is the Ice Woman. It's a story that, of course, through oral traditions, have followed the Haida culture, and they talk about how they originally were the people also coming to this place when the ice from the last ice age were retreating. So there are these stories that are they're very long stories, and I think sometimes that it's good to have that with us when we talk about our own perspective, Western perspective. But this is how we usually relate to things. So if the indigenous populations have their oral traditions and they're very alive, I would say, stories about nature and their relationship with nature, this is a Western archive. So we're very sort of keen on archiving things and collecting things and putting it all together. And that's, of course, part of our science system and our way of thinking and our knowledge system. So this is usually where I work, where I start my work, I would say, in a place like this. And then we go out. So we work in Svalbard, in something called Northwest Spitsbergen. And this is one way of doing it. And I will just give you a brief example, and then I'll hand over to Eric. So this is a glacier that we were looking for. And it's actually Eric's father, Pelle, who is holding the iPad here. And we've been sort of scouting this area for a while and we wanted to take, this is the image, this is the original photograph that we were looking for. It was taken in 1896, and you can even see it was taken on the 12th of August. It was scratched into the emulsion of the photograph by the photographer Nils Strindberg. And this place today, this is part of a panorama. So it's a three-part panorama. And there's a little lake there as well. And I would say that on the northwest coast, this is one of the most beautiful places, actually. One of my personal sort of favorites. And as you can see, there is a great difference today when glacier is virtually gone. I wanted just to end with saying one thing about the latest project that we're working on that Erik is also part of, and that is this bay. This is called Magdalena Bay or Magdalena Fjorden, where we will try to create this fjord. I wouldn't say a digital twin, but we have the idea of, in as many ways as possible, document this. And one of the bases for that is Erik 3D modeling. And also we will have Gorky Müller-Glaser, a filmmaker, with us, and we will use 180 degrees stereo cinema to create a kind of base for telling the story of this particular place. And I focused in here on a special glacier called Gully Brain or Gully Glacier, and there is actually, it's difficult to see here, but there is a number C. You can see the D in the middle there, and number C is to the left corner of the drawing of the glacier. And that's actually what named this glacier. There was a gully into the glacier, and that named it the Gully Glacier. This is what it looks like today. And what you see here is that if you look at there's a kind of bay that goes in towards the south. That is where that glacier was based. And if we move into that, it looks like this. So basically, the glacier was all the way out to the fjord itself, but this is now a bay. And this is the kind of place we're looking for. And I'll stop with this. This is around 1925, and images like this are of course really useful. And it comes from a tourist ship that was there, and that was very. It's a common practice even today that you have photographers on board tourist ships, and then they produce things, and tourists can take that with them. This is, and as you can see, also a lot of people, you can see them walking up to the glacier. This was really popular. This is the Gully Glacier, and it was one of the, I would say it's probably one of the most visited glaciers in Svalbard. This place today looks quite different. It looks like this. So this is something that we really want to also be able to communicate by hopefully being able to create virtual versions of this. So in virtual reality, you will be able to explore this place. That also brings then the glaciers from the north down south so that you can understand what it is like to be in a glacial land. I'll turn over to Erik.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll share my screen. Can you see my screen? Sure. Yeah, I'll take that as a yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So my talk is kind of it's centered around Magdalena Fjorden, which is becoming this kind of study site for exploring how to most easily communicate these changes that are going on. And a slide that I maybe should have had is actually trying to tackle what is a glacier and how does it move. So it was interesting with a kind of contrast that I saw in your drawings, which was that some described the glacier as a kind of almost river of ice, whereas others put it more chunky, like the glaciers that we see on this image. And both are 100% correct, and they occur in different climatic settings. So my supervisor for my master thesis, she, in her introductory lectures, she often bakes dough, or she doesn't bake it, she makes a bread dough, and she puts some gravel in it, and then she brings that to the lecture. So she puts this on this kind of tilting plane, and it starts creeping downwards. And how this dough moves down this slope is very close to how a glacier moves down valley. And depending on the climate, this will be more or less viscous. So in warmer areas like the Alps, it will, or in Alaska as well, they will turn into almost rivers. Whereas up here in the Arctic, they are kind of a little more compact. But yeah, so here we are in Magdalenefjorden. This is a, I'm going to talk about how I can use previously collected data, and also hopefully some more data that we're going to collect, to both measure but also to try to communicate the changes that occurred with it. So I work with digital elevation models. You might have heard that abbreviation called DEMs. It's basically just an image, but instead of the pixel values representing color, they represent elevation. And these can be used for a multitude of things. For example, to create 3D models, to visualize landscapes when you're not there. We can also compare these DEMs, basically just subtract them with each other to measure any kind of change. And I measure glacier change with them. We can also use them to locate these historic photographs. So this is a kind of example of a picture that was taken in Magdalenefjorden from 1907. And I've located, approximated where this picture was taken. So this shows us how much the glacier has changed, but it can also be a very good visual reference for actually finding the place today. So we can locate them, these photographs, and then, yeah, when we if we are unlucky and global pandemic occurs, for example, we can also use these in place. Then, so this is what I work with in most of my time. So if we, for example, have these digital elevation models, or DEMs, from 1990 down in the left, and from 2009 in the center. These are virtual views looking straight above. We can subtract them and measure the elevation change that occurred in between. So in the bottom right, you see these red colors. They indicate negative change. So near the front of the biggest glacier, can you see my cursor? No. Okay. Well, you'll just have to imagine it. The biggest glacier at the end of the fjord is changing. It has lost up to 100 meters of ice in 20 years, and that's a lot. That's very much. So if we look at all of this, if we look at this entire scene, the glaciers have changed. They have lost about 16.5 meters of elevation. And that maybe doesn't sound like much, but it's a big area. So this volume change that it represents is about 2,000 million cubic meters. Again, this might not say very much either. How much is 2,000 million cubic meters? Well, I made some comparisons to Gothenburg. So if you have ever been to the Gothenburg Central Station, it's actually quite big. It represents about 8 of those. It also represents about 92 Gothenburg museums of art. Finally, Göta Älv, the big river that flows close to Gothenburg, is quite big, but this represents about 41 days of all of the water that goes through there. And this is a relatively small area, so it's pretty much water that has been lost. Going to a quick comparison to Sweden, I did a reconstruction of one glacier in the Swedish mountains, which is called Storglaciären. But in spite of stor meaning big, this particular area is 32 times smaller. So it's not a perfect comparison, but it might still give us some kind of view over these numbers. So this glacier lost about 11 meters between 1910 and 2015. And at most it lost up to 95 meters. So it's the same order of magnitude. But if you might, if you see the time scale, this is over 105 years. The other was in 19 years. So this change is over the larger time scale is slightly smaller. And if we consider the time scale, we can say that the changes in Magdalenefjorden are about 8 times faster than in the Swedish mountains. And change happens fast in Sweden, but it happens very, very fast on Svalbard. So some of the prospects ahead for this project is that there are more of these aerial surveys. So I have the ones from 1990 and 2009, but then there are more all the way back to 1936. So there are more of these potential comparisons. We plan on using drone imagery to get a kind of similar virtual view from today or next year. So this might tell us, like 2009 is now 11 years ago. So there might have been a lot of change in between. We're also thinking about different ways of integrating these historic photographs into these virtual scenes. And finally, continue with these comparisons to put the scale in context. And with that, I want to thank you. Yeah, here's an example of a drone image that from 2016 that I took. Yes, thank you.
Could I ask something?
Yeah, of course.
In the Swedish glacier.
Yeah.
Could you show it quickly again, please? Why is there like a blue halo, like a ring around it with a bit more elevation?
That's an error. It's it's basically because like the 2015 DEM that I have is from aerial images. So these data come from above, whereas the 1910 images are terrestrial. So they there's a very different perspective, and so that creates like a fringe, which is very ugly around. So yeah, it's simply an error.
Yeah, I thought maybe it was accumulation of sediments or something like that. But...
Yeah, there is accumulation of sediments further downstream. Because these glaciers erode their substrate. So that is blue, but up here it's unfortunately just my processing, which is incomplete.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Eric and Tirone. It was really, really interesting, and also seeing the two very different perspectives that you offer, but how they complement each other as well. And it was very fascinating to see also the comparison with Gothenburg. And for the people who are there, I think this is really really helps, because you could see also, for example, Thomas and Cherkian, like you guys related it to the Netherlands. So then relating it to Gothenburg. So always, I guess, relating it to the place you are from or at, perhaps has a very big impact on the way you perceive the issue. And yeah, can really put things, put the scale in perspective.
Thank you, and I'm very open to suggestions, like how does one do this?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting what would happen if you combine it with storytelling. So yeah, how could there be like a narrative to tell this story of a glacier, and maybe impersonating the glacier, having that as a voiceover, or that the glacier can tell its own story. But it's just me brainstorming, but it can be all different ways. But maybe we can also ask the other students, do you guys have questions for Tirone or Eric? We have some more time, and actually 10 minutes, but we wanted to offer some time for discussion and for questions as well. So I don't know if more of you have some questions.
I think I have a question, just to clarify the impact of climate change to the glaciers. If the climate change wouldn't be happening, how the glaciers would they change? Would they grow? Would they reduce a bit? What would be the case?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's a very active question. So, like if we just like technically, if we removed climate change, the glaciers would stop changing, because the glaciers are a direct consequence of where they are situated and their climate. So yeah, so if we completely, like if the climate completely stopped changing, then these changes would also stop. In some glaciers, there is a like a response period, which can be of maybe 10 years, or it could be of 50 years, which means that some glaciers will need to adapt to the current climate that it is in. So in some cases, we will actually, like if the climate just stopped changing, we would still see change for up to maybe 50 years, and then it would stop. Then regarding, I don't know if it was maybe part of your question, but regarding how much human influence is in there, there's actually a paper which was published a few weeks ago that suggests that in the 2000s at least, it's 100% human influenced climate change. It's a pretty impressive paper, which goes in depth on all of these different aspects. And in the 1900s, there's definitely some combination between natural and human climate change, but now it's 100% us. Did that answer your question?
Is it possible to share this paper?
Yes, if I can find it. I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Björn Lagerdal. I work at the County Administrative Board for Västra Götaland, eller Länsstyrelsen. I'm helping out in organizing this Climate Cafe, and I would like to thank you very much for these presentations. They were excellent, I think. I had a question, Eric, or two questions. The first in the old, when you see the old pictures of the glaciers, are the ice stable at those points or dates in time? Is the ice sort of staying at that consistent state that they can be viewed in those pictures, or are they actually sort of recessing then too, but at a much slower pace?
Yes, and it's a very good, it's a very relevant question to ask. How, like, what do these pictures actually portray? And for example, in the case of the pictures taken here in 1907, the glaciers are actually already in retreat. So it's actually an active question when exactly the glaciers started retreating, but it seems to have been in the very late 1800s, so the 1890s maybe. And so retreat already started in the early 1900s, but this retreat is strongly accelerating today, and that is odd. So yeah, this picture, for example, already represents climate change.
Okay, interesting to know.
Yeah.
My other thing was more a reflection. I think it was a really good comparison with the runoff in Göta älv.
Yeah.
That you showed. That is very communicative, I think. And I had another thought, maybe if you could compare it with, if you take the amount of water that it's melt off, and maybe sort of you can look at a local lake, and if you put that extra water in that lake, how much would that level rise? Perhaps that would be another way of illustrating the amounts.
Yeah, that's
just a thought.
Good point. Yeah, I'll definitely keep that in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, or if that water would enter, would it cover the whole city, or how would it then indeed look like? Can we live with it, or are we all going to be underwater? I just wonder. But and I also wondered how wide is the effect of the melting of the glaciers? Like, maybe it's a stupid question, but will they affect the sea level rise globally? But does that mean different things for different countries, which are closer or further away, or?
Absolutely, and that's it's a very important question to ask. Like, why does this matter? And so first of all, there's sea level rise, and sea level rise is kind of sometimes it doesn't sound too bad. Like, if the sea rises by a centimeter, why does that matter? Well, the problem is that there's also the speed at which this is happening. So we're getting lots and lots of discharge from both the south and the north, which also affects the weather. So weather is literally just it's the effect of the Earth trying to level out its energy. So it's like a cold front is a gradient of energy, which is trying to get like evened out. And so having these large changes over a very short time frame changes the weather considerably. And that's why we get so much more storms today, for example. And also these big droughts and big rainfalls, everything gets bigger. And that happens with floods as well, for example. Sea level has barely started changing in the western part of Sweden. But it's already a big problem with more and more floods that happen.
Yeah, that's really, yeah, thanks. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and it also actually relates to what the stakeholders were saying about all these ways they're trying to look at ways to store stormwater, or the ways that heavy rainfall are affecting people, the way that they how do you say that? But they create fear in people from the cloudbursts and the heavy rainfall, and then it becomes harder to accept the water. And to, they also said, okay, how can we see the water as something positive? So it's hard, I can imagine, if there is a heavy rainfall and a flood, and your house gets flooded, or your basement, or the school of your child, or for example. But how do you accept that as something? But so how to create a new narrative around water in such a way that there could be room for this coming water, so that it is linked to a positive perspective and not to fear. So actually, it's very much related what today you present to us, and the challenges in Gothenburg and Mölndal, and I think in many places around the world.
Yeah, it's a hard question, and well, fortunately, I don't have to, or it's not my job to answer that because it's very
No,
difficult.
I just raise it within the group,
Yeah.
and I think we're gonna look at it today, this afternoon as well. Like, how could we think of ways to create a positive narrative around water, and like living with water and nature, and yeah. So it was not that much towards you that you have the answer, but that we could explore the answer together.
I think actually, Gabriella, that what you bring up is partly why we have been looking at indigenous cultures, because I think actually that there is a lot of answers to that question right there. We have so much to learn from how they actually live with, as you say, with nature, with
Yeah.
water, and not try to live against it or try to control it. Or, I mean, we have unfortunately developed a culture where we think that we can conquer, where we think that we can. Nature is only seen as a resource, but if you look at those indigenous cultures, they can teach us another way of actually engaging with the world, and also that's another way of also seeing ourselves as humans.
Yeah.
And that is really also related to a lot to narratives and stories.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And are there some key lessons that you have now in your mind, like from the search you already did, or you are in the middle of? Are there some main lessons or some key things you would take away so far from the indigenous cultures?
Well, I think it's really kind of in the beginning in many ways of that. But I think one thing is the relationship with nature, that you have a culture. If we take the Haida, for example, I'll be very
Yeah.
short, but I mean, they have recently written their own constitution. They're breaking free from Canada. It's not that they are trying to get completely autonomous, but they have really been extremely successful, and is one of the really good examples in the world. And that's what made Haida so famous. They are also an example set for many other indigenous cultures. And when they wrote their constitution, they gave nature legal status. So they actually created a culture based on the assumption that you cannot violate nature, because that will have legal consequences as if you violate humans. So
Mm.
there is something, and they've also said that, and they are practicing that. They are, for instance, their fishery. They're a maritime culture, and they're sort of they protected their forest. They succeeded with that, and now their next move is to protect their sea. So they're protecting the areas around their islands, but they're of course afraid also what happens on the Canadian side, where they see developments from, for instance, tar sands from Alberta, and they want to build pipelines. They're going to ship that dirty oil out from the west coast, and that's going to be ships passing Haida Gwaii. So they also use traditional methods of fishing, and they proved that those are quite effective. And of course, we're talking about smaller scale communities. But this is another thing I think that is interesting, and this has been suggested by others, island communities and so forth. Also thinking as cities as island communities, and then rewidening areas in between. But but there is this notion of also uh, using the small scale perspective, and also having a population that sees the value, the intrinsic value of nature, and also recognizing that we are part of nature. We're not something that stands beside that and have nature as a resource.
Yeah,
We're included in the system, so to say.
yeah, indeed. Yes.
Yeah, there is a nice book from I think it's the 18th century. It's called A Journey to the Northern Ocean by Samuel Hearn, and he was a naturalist and explorer, kind of. And he tried to get to it's called the Coppermine River. But back then you could also get there by foot. And he tried, I think, 2 times, didn't succeed. And in the end, he engaged more and more with the indigenous people and their ways and their like bushcraft and all their methods of their way of living. And with their help, he learned a lot of skills, and that's how we finally got there, actually.
That's a very good example, and there is actually now kind of focus on that, and also that exactly what you're talking about in terms of when they found John Franklin's 2 ships in northern Canada. The kind of been the holy grail of polar history for many years, and that is related to that kind of story and that kind of viewing of history, actually, that they kind of deliberately, in a way, did not want to use that knowledge that were available, but they rather went on, and we can see that in many um, expeditions of that era, where they didn't recognize what was there. And another figure that relates to what you said is John Ray, who is also a person. There's also really interesting books about him and his relationship with the native cultures and learning from that. So there were good examples even then.
Mm. Could you send Gianluca and Tirone the name of these books in the chat? It'd be very nice to have a look. Indeed. I also had a question just on what you mentioned, Tirone, about the Haida Gwaii and the way they gave nature a legal status. I was wondering so you said that, for example, whoever violates nature then gets a legal consequence. But does this also mean that they gave nature agency, so that they acknowledge it as a active agent that is a
Yeah.
key actor?
Yes, absolutely, and I think it came out of that, actually. I think that came first. This is something also that, I mean, for me as a Westerner coming there, even though I believe myself to be someone who is very much aware of my position in the natural world, and see us as part of the larger whole, But I've never encountered that in the way that I did when I was there working with them. Because basically, I mean, it's all. I think one thing that was really good for me was to get someone to look at me and say, "I'm worried about what your culture has done." And you realize that there are other ways of seeing the world, completely other ways of seeing the world.
Mm-hmm.
And and yes, I mean, for them, nature is a living being. It's something that you not only experience, but you're a part of. But nature is also there it takes care of you. And there is also the spirit world, which is very much alive. So so yeah, I would say that it's really difficult. I mean, I'm still trying to really understand that relationship that is there. And of course, it's not only them. We can see it here in Sweden. We have an indigenous population in the north, and Sweden has a lot to do to make good with that. So 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 I think we have a lot to learn. We are very advanced in our society and Western science. But also, I've noticed that a lot of in parts of Western science, there's a lot. I mean, you start to look at for instance, in ecology, you look at traditional knowledge of ecology and ways of actually approaching nature.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed, and it will be very interesting. I can imagine that it's hard to give nature this kind of status of an active actor because we cannot then control it, because then we would accept that it has its own power and agency to take action, and we cannot tell it what to do or not to do. And also another aspect could be that it's non-physical. It's physical, it's affecting us all, but it's not one person or a body of of a particular
But
place, or I don't know how to explain it, but I think I read this book by, or actually I'm gonna read this book, but I learned about this book by Timothy Morton. It's called Hyperobject. It talks about the concept of hyperobjects and that climate change is a hyperobject. What is a hyperobject? It's just like a physical object. It affects us all, and it can affect us emotionally, physically, but it doesn't have like this material quality like of being a table or a ball or like something very tangible that we could like really feel and see, but in a way is everywhere. So I'm thinking maybe nature is also a hyper object in that sense. So how can we give it some kind of tangibility through which we could work with it, live with it, kind of like acknowledge it? Yeah, just thinking
I
on the
think
spot.
one thing that is also I mean, we have a very anthropocentric view of the world. That's anthropocentric view of also of nature, of course. But the difference also is that if we take the Haida, for instance, there's a kin-centric view of world. So they actually always talk about the relations between generations and thinking about something that I mean, and we talked about sustainability, and they looked at us and they said, well, sustainability, we don't have that word. We talk about living natural. That's what it's all about. And it's a thing where I think the kin-centric idea is really important, because that really means that you're not only connected to the here and now and the place and nature and the world around us, but you're connected through time. So you're connected with the coming generations as well as the past generations, and that also gives us a completely different perspective on what we, I mean, take Swedish forestry, for instance. It's something that we want to sort of sell as being so sustainable and so well performed. It's really not that at all. And we're creating a lot of monocultures. We're not dealing very well with our forests for the future. But we could. And there is another type of forestry that I think is something that we need to also look at. That means that we only take what we really need, and we keep sort of taking it in a way so that it doesn't destroy the forest, because that's what we're doing. We're destroying forests. We're creating tree parks, and sort of timber yards, but we're destroying the forests. And this is also a difference. And this is something that I've been thinking a lot about since I went to Haida.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, very, very interesting indeed. Yeah. Also made me, but that's a personal connection. I will give space to everyone else, but just mentioning, I come from Bulgaria, and I started off with this interest in design with social impact and sustainability. So I went back to my family. I tried to explain it. And in Bulgarian language, there is no word for sustainability. And now that you say this, I think it's exactly for that reason, because they are living with nature. It's like, what do you mean? Like, they just adapt every time to the to what nature brings. I don't know how to explain it, but then back then I wondered, like, oh, I was frustrated, like, why there is no word for sustainability? How am I going to explain my grandma, what am I doing? But my grandmother is in total balance with her garden and with the fruits, and grows what grows there, and not cultivate a single species. Or it's very interesting, yeah, also in relation to different cultures. But now it makes me actually positive that it's good that we don't have that word. Yeah. Yeah, very interesting discovery. How was it for you guys? Did you have any insights? Yes, I know. Yeah. Yeah, we're a bit over time. It was really interesting though. So just maybe then as a checkout for everyone in the meeting, like, did you guys have any insights, or do you want to share something? Yeah, feel free.
Maybe just a quick last thing, that I think a month ago I was on a small seminar about one of the latest cruises by the Antarctic research body, and they went into, I don't know if it was the Ross Bay or so on, but they witnessed like a huge breakdown of ice, and they could take some measurements and so on, but they're actually planning on going back there and do some experiment on how that works with sediments and algal blooms and so on. So maybe it's going to be interesting to follow that. Like, they were even talking on using explosive to induce yes, things like that, because it's really difficult to plan for that. So
yeah, really interesting. Thanks, Gianluca. Well, let's make a round. Maybe Gintare or Thomas, Veronica, Cherkian.
It was a very interesting discussion, and I think also the problem of time is big for us. Like you, as the humans, we have a different scale timing in confront of the nature, and also in confront of the planet, because planets have a more bigger scales than the life on our planet, and also we have a time scaling very fast, and like we are running everywhere, everywhere, and every time for everything. And maybe we have to teach to people to slow down, to be more in connect with nature. So this is my insight.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm not going to comment after everyone because then taking more time. So just give you the space to make a round.
I can continue. Maybe just two short thoughts that came to my mind. Is one, I was really surprised by the example you mentioned about the constitution and how we have to be living with nature. I think it's really important to let go our control of nature, but it's really difficult how to change our mindset. But I really liked this example. And I also made a photo of a description of the first dense ice in Iceland, the iceberg. This, I don't know, it just left with me that our job now is to do something, and we won't see if that worked or not. But I think that letter to the future was really, I don't know, it just left with me.
Yes, I thought it was very interesting, and it's insane that we are so small as human beings, and we can destroy such a big thing as a glacier. That's yeah, that's insane. And that's according to the article, that's 100% our fault. That's yeah, bizarre.
Yeah. Also proves the power of our actions in a way. So if you would turn around the energy or like the effect of our actions, it really proves how powerful they can be. So in a way, it's also, I would take it as like, okay, if we have apparently this big of an effect, then it is true that if we do take action in the other direction, that we can also have this big of a positive effect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
both of these, it kind of resonated with me what you mentioned earlier with that climate change is quite intangible, and I completely understand that, and I remember having felt the same. But since I work with it every day, it's very tangible. It's like it's a very obvious cause and effect, and so it's interesting to be reminded of the fact that it might not be that kind of easy to see the connection, and it's yeah, so it's a good thing to keep on working on. So thank you.
I think if someone is interested, and just have a look, because now like climate change is part of global change, and that includes so much more, and that's things you see every day, like changes in the way we use our land and so on. Like I found it really interesting, my parents' generation, what they say so often now, they're from Germany, that when they were my age, there were so many more insects. Like when they went by car from one city to the other, or through the countryside, like the window shield was full of insects, and now it's not really. And yeah, it's scary, at least, I would say.
Yeah, it's also taking the time to notice these small things, right?
Regarding the rights for glaciers, for example, there has been a movement who's been talking about that if rivers should have rights. So it's a bit of the same idea. I put a link in there in the chat. But I think there is a discussion now also at the European level, the policymakers, like, okay, if we want to do this, how should we operate it? So it's kind of cool, I think, that you see already this indigenous point of view, trying to make that work in our Western institution and see if we can even handle that. So just, I don't know, I think that's a very interesting thing to keep following. And maybe also, for like a last remark, I think this kin-centric point of view is really interesting, like instead of sustainability, but it also makes me think, because it's a lot based on family values, and not everyone is that, not everyone wants children, for example. So it's also connected to a kind of point of the of family values. So I don't know, that's just a thought that comes to my head, that I really like it, but I'm also wondering if it would work completely or not.
I think actually that also the whole idea of the kin-centric perspective was, it can be sort of related to family, but it's also related to being part of the land and being part of something that is a greater whole. So you still have to think about that as a whole, and so I believe at least that you can read it in a wider perspective. But I would think that what you are addressing might actually be a problem if we started to talk about it here.
And I find this discussion really interesting too. I've really enjoyed it, and the insight that comes to me from it is that to me it's a lot about identity for us. That's the sort of baseline in this, to me. The baseline in how we view ourselves and our connections to our surroundings, really. So I'll take that with me, and I think it sounds like you have from this discussion, it's going to be really interesting to see how your design workshop works out. So exciting.
Yeah, thanks, Björn. Chair Ken, would you also like to add something?
Yeah, I find it very fascinating, and also very painful to see the glaciers reducing that much. I hope I can. I don't hope that I need to tell the future generations from we once had glaciers or something like that, that if it doesn't exist anymore. So feel kind of powerless with these things. They are so big and they are reducing so fast. So I hope they will stay with us a lot of time.
If it's any consolation, even though it goes very fast, there's a lot left, so it will take a few hundred years to go away completely.
Yeah, but still.
Yeah, ending up a bit more on a positive note. Yeah, there is this whole movement on deep adaptation by a guy called Jem Bendel, and his view on deep ecology is a little bit quite on the dark side. So actually what he has to do after lectures or talks is that really like emotional support for the people who are listening. So I think I also am very careful in my mind, like, okay, need to take care of you, that we also end up on a positive note, and kind of how to relate it back to the city, and to the fact that actually it means that if our actions can have such big impact, they can also have such big positive impact to stop it or to adapt to it. Yeah.
That's a very positive end note. Nice.
Yeah, I mean, the only silver lining with the fact that it's our fault means that means that we can undo it. I guess that's the most positive thing you can get out of it.
Yeah, indeed. Well, thank you. We are a little bit over time, but this discussion was so nice that I thought, okay, it's really good to have this dialogic space together and to talk about this together with all the input. and insights. So thank you both for visiting us this morning. It was very interesting, and I think for all of us, I can speak. We will stay in contact, and maybe we will see you tomorrow in the seminar. We'll continue the day with the design thinking workshop and presenting that what happened this week tomorrow at the online event. Yeah, so hope to see you there and hope to stay in contact. So thank you.
Thank you for all the questions.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you
so
very much.
let's take a 10-minute break, and then we meet back. This is messages targeted to all the participants. So we will take a 10-minute break, and then we meet here again for the next session.
Okay.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey, is everyone back?
Hey. Ja, of ik.
Grab a cup of coffee, some water, that's even better.
Water, yes. Really cool, right? This whole perspective.
Yes, it was really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really interesting the way we connected as well. Like we were doing the organization and asked the Swedish partners to connect us someone within the arts, and so fascinating that actually through photography he combines it with science, and then it's like an actual research that he also likes to bring back to people. And
Oh, the
Yeah.
term, that it was like an actual term. I just looked it up now.
glaciology?
No, the photogrammetry. It's like the cartography and like all these types of things. But then, yeah, it's a real. I didn't know about it. Yeah.
It's really cool. I did a bit of that during my bachelor's, and we even, if you have like aerial images made with plane, you know, you take a picture, the plane moves along, and you take a picture here, and then I don't know, a few seconds later, you take the same picture, and it is more or less the same picture, but actually the perspective is a bit different. So if there are like some special glasses which close up one eye. So if you you see one picture with one eye and the other picture with the other eye, and then you 3D it and you can see the whole thing in 3D, and it's just how our mind works, like how our brain works. And then and then you can draw like contour lines of height and so on.
That's so cool. Yeah.
That's how they used to do elevation maps before, like without computers and so on.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really cool. Yeah. Oh, but very interesting. And also that we're learning like together, you know, because I think that's also a big part of Climatecafé, to bring people to have these discussions. Yeah. And you've, of course, been through a whole of a lot already with all the tools and the new input. For today, very important to say, we're going to go into design thinking, but also the design thinking is more a rough framework. But the idea is that we look into how can we create or come up together, co-create ideas which really target also the local challenges that you've been given by the local stakeholders, so that when you present it tomorrow, that it's really something they can take up upon. And just like you heard from what was his Eric just now, that indeed, like we do have the power to create positive impact. So I think would be most amazing if we can really try to in-depth look at how something we co-create can really answer the local challenges and what they shared with you guys yesterday and throughout the week. So let's all look at Miro board. Maybe before that, you are 5 now at this stage. So I was going to propose to split you in 2 groups, and each group can develop an idea and work it out today. And I wanted to propose that because I think it's nice to be together and to be as a group. But if some of you like to have a specific individual idea and say, okay, I want to do it on my own, or I'm also we're open to that, but just wanted to ask you, what do you prefer as well?
I have some ideas, but I'm happy to work in a group.
Nice.
I would like to work in a group as well.
Cool. Well, group work it is then. You could also work all of you as one group and then make 2 ideas. That's also possible because you're quite a small team and you all know each other by now. And I think Veronica and Gintare, they unfortunately had to miss some elements. So you guys then can help them what happened with the cognitive mapping and the stakeholders and the RAIN tool. So maybe you can all work together as one group and then have 2 or 3 human ideas, depending on the amount you like. All right, and the plan for tomorrow is like we have a space in the seminar, so we have a time frame, and the idea is that there is time for you guys to present your ideas, and then the stakeholders from yesterday, like Dick, Lisa, and Anna, they like to have like a discussion with you around that. So it would be more like a panel. So just discussing what you presented, because we thought it's nice to make it also a bit interactive and not only have a PowerPoint and then, okay, but actually to have a discussion. So yeah. I see Malin is waiting in the room. Just a second. Hi, Malin. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, Malin. Well, we are now going to head into group work and work with design thinking on creating some ideas. Just letting
Sounds
you know.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you would like to listen in or...
I think I'll probably leave the groups to themselves. Might be better.
Yeah.
And then
yeah.
I'll... Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. And we are recording everything, so then we can also look back at the presentation that we just had.
Great.
Yeah. Well, thanks. All right. So let's go back all to the Miro board. Okay. Okay. Yes. Another thing to mention is because the discussion was so interesting, it kind of took half an hour longer to give space to it. So now we only have like around 1 hour before the lunch break. And I really want you guys to have a good lunch break. I don't want to violate that time. So we will do part of design thinking now for 1 hour and then the other part in the afternoon, because we have time until 3 or 4, depending on when you're ready to like prototype, visualize, and work out the ideas. Okay, so if you're all in Miro, you probably heard already about design thinking. So design thinking, it is a method that is often used in the creative sphere, but also not only in the creative sphere. It has 3 main frames: that's understanding, explore, and materialize. And within those, we have 6 steps. So empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test, implement. And I think we are already throughout the week have been doing the empathize phase. So you have been collecting information, trying to understand the local stakeholders. You conducted interviews. So in a way, you could say you already try to empathize with the local issue in Gothenburg and Mölndal. So the next step is define. And we'll start with this step. We call it, here they call it define, but we just wanted to give you time to collect all the insights, because as you saw yesterday, also you all guys wrote like you had so much things on your mind. So it's good to look back of the whole week and then harvest all the insights and come up together as a group. Okay, what are the main insights? Also looking at yesterday, the interviews with the stakeholders, the key concepts, the post-its. What are the main insights that we want to tackle and the main challenges with your ideas? And then we'll go into the phase of brainstorming. So together as a group, you can brainstorm. There will be individual time first to put all of your ideas by yourself, to take the time, and then share it with the group and see and map using a tool I will show you in a bit, that you can actually help, that tool will help you to decide which idea to go forward with. I plan to do these 2 steps in this 1 hour, and then after the break to focus on prototyping together and visualizing the idea. We will get only to that stage, and tomorrow is a kind of an opportunity to test your ideas, actually. Because of this panel discussion, you can share what you've come up with those local stakeholders. You can say, okay, this is a test for us. Would this work for you? Would there be financing, or how would it work in practice? Is this possible, etc. So you can really have a look at the possibility of implementation. And then the stakeholders can take it further into implementation phase. That's a possible outcome, of course. So that was, I was describing in the circle that you see on the right picture. On the left, you see a linear visualization of all the steps. And I chose this picture just to show you that it's not only linear, but it also comes back to each other. So let's say you've already, you already are at the test step. So after your test, you can come back to your prototype and you can say, okay, I need to tweak a little things. From the prototype, you can also come back to empathize. Oh, but maybe I need to talk to the local community through using my prototype. Is this a good prototype? Would that function and help? So just to show you that it's more than a linear process. So you can go again and again back to the different steps. Okay, so this was my small introduction. And below the 2 images that I've been telling about, you will see the first step 1, and that's insight. And I think it will be good for you to, as a group, I will put you in a breakout room so you can do it between yourselves. Write down on Post-its all the insights collected throughout the whole week. And perhaps select with a red color, orange color, I don't know, it's a different color, the main ones that you would like to work with. We've almost already done that a little bit yesterday. So probably that will be quick for you. So, but just as a kickstart of this session to put everything on that square. And then I would like to ask you to, from those insights, design and create a how can we question. So, for example, it can be, I'm just giving an example of how can we question, but how can we design an awareness campaign in such a way that people in the local community have more acceptance for water, let's say. This is just an example, but I would like you to come up with your own how can we question as a group, because that is what you're going to base your ideas on. And it's very important that this how can we question is related to the local challenges that were described by the stakeholders. Okay, so this is for now, the instructions. I will send you in a breakout room, and we can have 20 minutes, because maybe it's good to have some time to collect all the insights, but also have enough time to come up with a design question. Yeah, okay, hope that's clear. And please feel free to come up with more than one how can we question. We can always talk about it at the end in this plenary group. And if you have more ideas, well, that's even better. So we can present and you can tackle more than one how can we question. All right. Breakout room. Assign manually. Okay. Wait. Just one moment. All right. Well, we'll see you here at 10:20. And if you have any questions, you can come back here. Okay. Have fun. Don't forget to have fun.
Hello.
Hi. Yes, we're here.
Could you give us permission to share a screen?
Of course. How do I do that? How do I make you co-host while you're in a group? Wait.
I think there's this option of share screen. If you
Oh, maybe at the participant here. Okay, what did you say? Share screen and then?
yeah, or more advanced settings, and then you can.
Oh,
Yeah, now everyone can share.
I think now everyone,
Yeah, I can share here. I'm gonna try in the breakout room.
you can try there, and if it doesn't work, then I will go in there. Oh, I can go in there with you and just make everyone in there co-host.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for letting me know. Still discovering this Zoom.
That's one of the
Hey
main
guys.
points.